What happens when one of the most influential pastors in America publicly exposes another preacher for misleading the flock? In a stunning turn of events, Creflo Dollar didn't hold back, directly blasting Brian Carn and accusing him of leading believers astray. This is not just another church disagreement. This clash has shaken the entire faith community to its core. But what really pushed Creflo Dollar to go public? And what explosive truth lies behind the scenes that no one expected to hear? Stay with us, because this revelation may change everything you thought you knew about both men. On one side, we have Brian Carn, a preacher whose bold prophecies, dramatic statements, and magnetic presence have built him a loyal following. On the other, a voice just as powerful, refusing to stay silent. Now, these two forces of faith are clashing, and the shockwaves are shaking the Christian world. What started as whispers has erupted into a full-blown storm. Creflo has stepped forward with fiery words, accusing Brian of twisting the truth, misleading believers, and even taking advantage of those who trusted him most. And Brian? He isn't backing down. His sharp responses, sometimes direct, sometimes cryptic, have only thrown more fuel on the fire. The result? A church community divided. Leaders are choosing sides, believers are questioning what's real, and social media is ablaze with debate. Why did Creflo decide to call Brian out now? What was really said? And could this battle between two high-profile voices change the way people view both of their ministries forever? In this video, we're diving deep into the full story, the history behind the tension, the accusations shaking the church world, and the impact this feud could have on faith communities everywhere. We'll also look at the layers that are concealed, the stories that didn't make the news, the links that many people haven't noticed, and the questions that nobody is willing to address in public. You'll have a better understanding of the true issues at the conclusion. And believe me, it's more than just a dispute between two pastors. For thousands of individuals stuck in the middle, it's about religion, leadership, and trust. This isn't just another story about church drama, so fasten your seatbelt. Things start to get really intriguing at this point. We must first take a careful look at the two men at the heart of this conflict in order to fully comprehend its gravity. Brian Carn and Creflo Dollar. In the Christian world, they are not insignificant names. Each has decades of impact, following, and power, which is precisely why their confrontation has been so painful. First up is Creflo Dollar. He has established himself as one of the main proponents of the prosperity gospel movement for more than 30 years. His organization, World Changers Church International, attracts millions of people online and thousands in person. He is an accomplished preacher who is well known for his teachings on religion, financial independence, and the value of living a victorious life. However, there's been some disagreement over Creflo's travels. His controversial remarks regarding tithing, particularly his startling flip in 2022 when he said that traditional teaching on tithing was faulty, and the scrutiny surrounding his private aircraft purchases are just two examples. Creflo has never hesitated to express his opinions, regardless of how unpopular they may be. Let's go on to Brian Carn. He is an example of a charismatic leader from a younger generation. Carn is well known for his prophetic manner and frequently asserts that he has divine insight into the future and present affairs. His ministry is fueled by audacious declarations, passionate delivery, and a passion that attracts people seeking supernatural validation. However, that approach has drawn criticism. He is accused by skeptics of manipulation, theatrics, and even fraudulent prophecy. But in spite of the controversy, Carn still has a devoted following of people who believe he is a modern-day prophet. Because it explains why their collision feels so important, this context is essential. On one side, you have the Creflo Dollar, which is well known, polished, and valued all over the world. Brian Carn, on the other hand, is fearless, unvarnished, and committed to demonstrating that his prophetic voice cannot be disregarded. There is more than simply a conflict when these two worlds intersect. It's an ideological conflict, spontaneity versus structure, prophetic freedom versus established leadership, self-declared authority against accountability. Because of this, when Creflo Dollar did speak out, it wasn't interpreted as a casual remark. People saw it as a call to action, a pronouncement that drew a line in the sand and made them pick a side. However, what did he say specifically, and what set off this flaming moment? The plot takes a drastic turn at that point. The world pays attention when a pastor of Creflo Dollar's caliber speaks up. He has been selecting his words carefully for decades, considering how they will affect not only his congregation but also the body of Christ worldwide. The shockwaves therefore spread swiftly when he openly targeted Brian K. It wasn't subtle. Indirect message or layers of metaphor were not used to conceal this. Creflo Dollar was blunt in his criticism of Brian K. churchgoers who were there, and sources claim that Creflo Dollar didn't hold back. Any leader who manipulates God's people, who plays with prophecy for their own gain, is leading the flock astray, and I will not stand by and watch it happen, he stated in one of his most scathing statements. Even if he didn't specifically mention Brian K. at the time, anyone who had been watching the drama could see the allusions. His remarks coincided precisely with some of K's most recent and contentious public forecasts. For instance, Brian K. has a history of making audacious forecasts, some of which thrill his fans and others of which detractors claim never materialize. Creflo says that this pattern is harmful. Why? Because it encourages desperation and makes weaker people believe theater rather than the Bible. Creflo underlined that a pastor or prophet's job is to lead God's people with honesty, not to become famous or wealthy. He maintained that any less is spiritual abuse. This is when the exciting part begins. According to some people who attended Creflo's funeral, he did more than merely critique prophetic theatrics. He specifically referred to leaders who create platforms based on false promises and half-truths. That phrase struck a chord because it appeared to take aim at K's detractors, who have charged him with foretelling events that either never happened or were later shown to be false. Another notable aspect of Creflo's tone was its intensity. He wasn't composed or aloof. He was passionate, ferocious, and unrepentant. It was the kind of fervor that made people remember why he had initially gained such a strong voice. He desired for the church to awaken and cease mindlessly adhering to charismatic figures without taking responsibility for their actions. Here's the worst part though. Many people started to wonder why now after the sermon went viral. Why did Creflo decide to speak at Brian K.'s ministry at this particular time? Was it a recent prophecy that K had made? Was it related to mounting internal church community pressure? Or did Creflo draw the line in public because of something more serious going on behind the scenes? Since there is typically a private narrative that explains the time behind every public outburst, it is the section we must examine next. Furthermore, this instance is not distinct. Leaders like Creflo Dollar rarely make public statements at random. Timing, accuracy, and planning have been key components of his ministry's success. This indicates that he wasn't merely acting on impulse when he called out Brian K. It was the outcome of several things that came to a head. What precisely was it that drove Creflo to the brink of silence? Then, let's dissect it. First, there were the contentious predictions made by Brian Carn has made a number of daring statements over the years, some concerning world events, some about politics, and even some about the private lives of members of his church. Even while these events attracted large audiences and established him as a contemporary prophet, not all of his predictions came to pass. Critics started calling him a false prophet, claiming that he was making exaggerated prophecies to attract followers and keep his position of power. This type of ministry was not only troublesome, but also perilous from a spiritual standpoint for a teacher like Creflo Dollar, who has spent decades stressing biblical correctness. The second catalyst was Brian K.'s increasing sway over younger followers. Carn was particularly intriguing to a generation that was already dubious of conventional church organizations because of his charisma, vigor, and capacity to emotionally engage listeners. This worried Creflo because he believed that untried and unaccountable leadership could influence multitudes of gullible believers. He believed that if individuals like K were allowed to continue their activities, the church's future would be in jeopardy. Third, the religious community itself reported there were rumors that people were suffering from emotional, spiritual, and even financial harm as a result of placing too much faith in K's statements. There have been accounts of people following K's predictions to make life-altering choices, only to feel deceived when things didn't work out. These weren't unique incidents to a seasoned leader like Creflo. They were warning signs. Lastly, there was the growing peer pressure. Discussions concerning the need to address dubious behaviors in the prophetic movement were already taking place in ministry circles. Fearing retaliation, several leaders decided to remain silent. However, the outspoken Creflo Dollar felt he could no longer overlook the problem. He wasn't speaking only to K, They applied to the whole church. He had a message for you. It's risky to be a leader without accountability, and Christ's body is worthy of better. When you combine all of this, you can see why Creflo's tone was so acerbic. Why were his remarks so unyielding? He wasn't only annoyed, he was very worried. Worried that the gospel's integrity was in jeopardy, that those who were weak were being controlled, and that the issue would only worsen if established leaders remained silent. Even though Creflo's remarks were impactful, the narrative didn't end there. Because as soon as he said those words, they went viral on social media, among church groups, and among the general public. People were picking sides, not just responding to what he said. And it was the response that really ignited this controversy. Here's the startling bit, though. Brian K. has no intention of remaining silent. This was a one-sided criticism, but his response escalated it into a full-fledged confrontation. One thing is certain if you know anything about Brian K., he doesn't back down in silence. He responded to Creflo Dollar's critiques with the same ferocious vigor that he brings to his pulpit. Furthermore, his response did more than merely spark discussion. It caused rifts in the religious community that haven't been witnessed in a long time. Brian K. responded quickly after Creflo Dollar's reprimand was made public online. K. leaned in, portraying himself as the object of spiritual envy and miscommunication, rather than withdrawing into quiet. True prophets will always face persecution, K. said in a sermon that went viral very fast. He implied that Creflo's remarks were about fear rather than truth by equating himself with biblical characters who encountered opposition and rejection. Fear of being replaced by a new generation of prophets. K. didn't stop there, though. He vehemently disputed the notion that his ministry was deceptive or manipulative. He argued passionately that his prophecies had healed individuals who had lost hope, restored faith, and benefited countless people. K. claims that his goal was not to become famous or wealthy. It had to do with following God's call, even if it meant facing severe criticism from powerful people. His supporters were captivated by his combative attitude. In response to the harsh attacks by the church's old guard, many people flocked to social media to express their support and refer to him as a modern-day prophet. In other circles, hashtags endorsing K started trending, generating a wave of solidarity that demonstrated the true loyalty of his following. Creflo Dollar's statements proved to them that K was real. How could the enemy target someone who posed no threat to the kingdom of darkness? After all, however, K's defense increased mistrust among his detractors while also energizing his closest followers. His remark was viewed by some as being extremely defensive, even haughty. They contended that K portrayed himself as a victim rather than humbly addressing the issues brought up, which only served to cast doubt on his ministry's accountability and humility. Church leaders and pastors started to voice their opinions. While some supported togetherness rather than divisiveness, others hesitantly agreed with KFO's cautions. This is where the situation became even more complex. K's defense wasn't the end of it. Some saw his statement as a challenge. Any leader who genuinely hears from God, he said, need to be prepared to face him head-to-head and compare their respective fruits. Many saw that bold comment as a direct challenge to Creflo Dollar, challenging him to demonstrate that his ministry produced greater spiritual outcomes than K's prophetic work. The religious community as a whole was impacted by this conflict between egos, beliefs, and ministries. The story was picked up by churches, internet discussion boards, and even non-religious news sources. All of a sudden, this was more than simply Creflo and K. It turned into the bigger argument. Is there a role for prophets in the church today? If they do, how can the church hold them responsible if predictions don't come true, or if someone is hurt in the process? Brian K's unyielding reaction made sure that this wouldn't just go away. Rather, it sparked a flurry of discussion that compelled believers worldwide to face difficult issues regarding accountability, authority, and truth in spiritual leadership. However, you should reconsider if you believe that this was the height of the drama. For what followed was more than a verbal exchange between two males. Leaders, followers, critics, and the larger church community were all drawn into the discussion and their response. The tale really picks up steam at that point. The consequences of this altercation between Brian K. and Creflo Dollar extended beyond live streaming and pulpits. Across the country, it permeated church conferences, prayer circles, and living rooms. Believers who had previously worshiped together suddenly found themselves on different sides of a religious battleground. Those who stood solidly with Creflo Dollar were on one side. These voices concurred with his caution, contending that rather than reverting to the core biblical principles, the contemporary church had become far too reliant on dazzling predictions and promises of miracles. They viewed Ka's ministry as a risky diversion, a show that focused attention on man rather than Christ. Creflo was more than just a critic to them. He was summoning the church back to discernment and accountability by issuing a prophetic safeguard. Brian Carn's supporters were on the opposing side and equally fervent. For them, Creflo Dollar stood for an older generation of leaders that did not want to accept the new prophetic voices that God was bringing forth. They felt that Carn was being unfairly singled out, not because he was incorrect, but rather because he was upending the status quo and revealing the complacency of powerful people who had become overly accustomed to their roles. Some even claimed that the criticism validated Carn's legitimacy. After all, genuine prophets in the Bible frequently encountered opposition and hostility. As more well-known pastors, gospel musicians, and Christian influencers started to voice their opinions, the split only grew wider. On social media, some made veiled jabs by sharing cryptic Bible passages concerning false prophets or cautions against arrogance. Others publicly supported one side or the other, promoting their viewpoints through podcasts and interviews. Ordinary believers, meanwhile, were caught in the midst. For many, picking a side between two well-known preachers wasn't the only consideration. It was about tackling the more significant issues. How can we tell if a prophecy is actually from God? Should popularity and charm ever take precedence over responsibility? And above all, what happens when religious leaders argue in such a public way? Does it make the church's overall witness stronger or weaker? There was more to this occasion than debate. Identity was at issue. It compelled the church to examine itself critically and consider whether it had grown more fixated on persons than on values, more enthralled with prophecies than reality. And one thing has become very evident as this story progresses. We're not going to stop talking anytime soon, regardless of whether you support Brian Carn's defiance or Creflo Dollar's censure. Their altercation has caused a rift in the contemporary church that will require time and possibly a great deal of humility to mend.